Hi, welcome to Skill Set Counseling. My name is Dr. Felucia. I'm a licensed psychologist, and today I'm going to be talking to you about 5 common phrases that you commonly hear in spiritually abusive environments. And I want to start off with a disclaimer. I'm going to go over the 5 phrases, but I want you to remember that just because you hear a phrase like this in your spiritual environment does not necessarily mean that you are in a spiritually abusive environment. I also want to clarify that these statements can have an element of truth to them, and that there's nothing wrong or harmful necessarily in those statements when you just look at them by themselves. What I am saying is that in spiritually abusive environments, these are phrases that you are likely to hear more often. And I want to explain how these phrases convey and demonstrate spiritual abuse. For more information on my videos about spiritual abuse, you can go in the playlist, or actually not playlist, but if you just go in the video section, you'll see videos explaining what spiritual abuse is. I'm going to go over it pretty frequently in my videos, and I'm going to reiterate it here again. Spiritual abuse is basically a situation, or spiritual abuse rather occurs in a situation where someone uses spirituality as a way to harm. Okay, usually it's somebody in spiritual authority, but it doesn't always have to be somebody in authority, because spirituality is authoritative in and of itself. And so you can be in an environment where you are being spiritually abused by someone who is not a spiritual authority. However, spiritual abuse occurs when someone uses spirituality to harm instead of help, to take away your power and control you instead of giving you power and helping you and helping improve your life. Okay, so that's in essence what spiritual abuse is. And I'm going to go over some phrases that you commonly hear in spiritually abusive environments. The first one is, God told me to tell you. Okay. And, sometimes when people use this phrase, they just may be trying to be helpful. But what that phrase implies is that that person is speaking definitively on behalf of God. Okay. And that is using spirituality, the concept of spirituality, and even their spiritual authority, if they have any in that situation, to try and control your life. When you're in a spiritual environment, you, like everyone else, have the ability to hear from God. And so when someone comes in and says, well, I'm telling you, you have to do this on behalf of God, that takes away your autonomy. It takes away your power. It takes away your authority. And if you were to disagree with that person and say, I don't think so, I don't agree, then they come back and say, oh, well, you know what? You're disagreeing with God. Or are you saying that God is wrong? It sets up a false advantage, an unfair advantage, and one that should not exist in a spiritually healthy environment. So the first one is, God told me to tell you, or God said this. Now, of course, we have scriptures to reference and things like that. But when someone is trying to tell you specifically what to do in your life, how to control you on behalf of God, that's wrong. That's spiritual abuse. The second phrase is that you don't have enough faith, or you didn't have enough faith, or whatever it is, something along those lines of not having enough faith. Okay. And the reason why that is a spiritually abusive phrase is because, first of all, it's very difficult, and I would say even impossible, for someone to look at someone else and just know automatically they did or did not have enough faith in situation. And people have oftentimes have heard these very painful and insensitive and abusive phrases when they've gone through something very personal and challenging, like a loss, a crisis, and they're told by people in their community, you don't have enough faith, and this is why that happens. What that does is it puts the person who is telling you this in some sort of false expert position, that they know exactly what happened to you was a result of you not having enough faith. And they're also blaming you. They're putting you in the position of basically they're blaming you and saying you're responsible for the calamity that happened in your life, without taking into consideration that there are just other factors. We live in a fallen world. We don't live in a perfect world. really terrible things happen to people that that aren't expecting it, that don't have control over it. I mean, this is the kind of world that we live in. So for someone to come in and say definitively, I know this happened to you because you didn't have enough faith, that is spiritual abuse. Okay, that person is using spirituality to harm you. How can someone measure how much faith you truly have or don't have in a situation? Faith is an abstract concept, and it's true that yes, we can demonstrate faith by certain things, but everybody's walk is personalized, it's individual, and someone cannot just tell you that something happened because of this. It's a very limited viewpoint. It's a very reductionist viewpoint, saying this happened because definitely this occurred. And that's not a position that anyone should be in a spiritual environment. They can offer assistance, they can offer counsel, they can, pray for you and give you resources, but to blame you for something that happened or blame your lack of faith, that is being spiritually abusive. And oftentimes, sometimes people in spiritual environment at times can have a really difficult time admitting that they don't know the reason for something, that they can't pinpoint why something happened. It can be challenging for some people, and they feel like when they're confronted with something difficult, like somebody grieving, somebody grappling with why this happened, they have to be the expert and they have to have the answer. And it's not a healthy trait at all. And this is commonly found in spiritually abusive environments. Okay. The third phrase is, I'm only human. And you often hear this from leaders who have done something to harm somebody else. And when they're confronted about it, or when they're questioned about something, they resort to this excuse of, well, I'm only human. Now that's true. We all are only human, right? But if you also think about it, they're in a position of authority. I mean, if it's a pastor, they're standing on a pulpit, an elevated physical position, they're assumed to speak, on behalf of God. And so when someone says that, it seems it's contradictory because their position in and of itself is one of authority. And yes, while that's true that they're only human and we should have grace and compassion for our leaders, it also doesn't excuse wrongdoing. And when someone says something like, well, I'm only human, I think that can mean sometimes, well, you know what, look past what I did. What I did should be excusable because I'm only a human being. It's true, nobody's perfect. But when someone says that to you, when they're being confronted about something, it kind of puts them in a position for you to try and feel sorry for them, to kind of escape what they actually did. Saying I'm only human avoids accountability. Okay, that's really important because as leaders actually have a higher accountability to God and to others because they're in the position of being a leader. And so sometimes when people use that phrase, it could also be a way of kind of trying to create an environment or create an illusion of camaraderie. Well, yes, I'm just like you. Well, actually not. We are alike in some ways, but we're also different in different ways and having different positions. Okay, so that's the third one. The fourth one is we're all family here. Now, yes, in a spiritual environment, you can be considered a spiritual family, but for some people, that can feel really invasive, and they can feel like they're trying to create a false sense of intimacy or rush intimacy. Families. When you say, oh, we're all family here, to someone especially who may be new, to somebody who does not necessarily feel like they want to be a part of that environment or commit to it, it feels again like this kind of false rushed sense of camaraderie or intimacy. The fact is, in a spiritual environment, people can choose whether they want to be there or not. So saying, well, we're all family, what's the reason behind saying that? And when people have been in spiritually abusive situations, oftentimes that phrase, we're all family, is used to try and coerce the person who is being spiritually abused, either into covering something up, looking the other way regarding something, or just dealing with something and putting up with something that's not healthy and that should not be there. It could also be used, like I said before, to create a false sense of intimacy. But this is being kind of weaponized against this person to maybe do something that they're not comfortable with. So it may be, take on a responsibility for someone else that they should be responsible for. They might say, well, we're all family here. Why don't you let them live with you? Or why don't you pay for this? Or why don't you do this? It's used, the false sense of intimacy or the desire to appear as a cohesive unit is used to try and coerce or manipulate you into doing something that you don't feel comfortable with. And the fact is, in healthy families, people still have their own individual autonomy and their own rights and their own boundaries. Okay. The fifth phrase that you'll often hear in a spiritually abusive environment, rather, is be positive. Something along the lines of that: be nice, speak life. And again, there's nothing wrong with being positive, being nice, or speaking life into a situation. The issue is when this is used to control the narrative, right? And so sometimes people have felt uncomfortable with something that they did, and they're speaking up about it. Hey, I didn't like it when you did this, or did you notice that there's this kind of disturbing behavior in another individual? And what this is done, when we hear this phrase, be positive, speak life, be nice, it's used as a way to, in a spiritually abusive environment, to shield from criticism, either shield the person that they're protecting or just create an environment where people cannot criticize or speak up for the truth. And the fact is, there's nothing wrong with criticism. There's healthy criticism, there is constructive criticism, but this is to just put a damper or a blanket over all of that. Like, nope, even though there's someone doing something clearly wrong, clearly harmful, you can't speak up about it, because if you do that, you're not being positive, you're not being nice, you're not speaking life. And so again, yes, is being positive and being nice, are those good things to have? Of course, but they can't come at the expense of truth and at the expense of safety of other people. So I'm going to go over those 5 phrases again. The first one: God told me to tell you, or God said you should do this. How is that spiritually abusive? It's used to control you, right? Because you speaking up about that, saying, I don't agree, the person can come and say, well, are you disagreeing with God? And that is often used in spiritually abusive environments. The second one is you don't have enough faith, right? It's this knee-jerk response to blaming someone or trying to find a single cause for what happened. Okay. And that person is putting themselves as the expert and the authority into what your life is supposed to look like, the amount of faith that you have or didn't have. And the point is that, we talk about spirituality and spiritual abuse and what that is, and that is using spirituality harm, especially since if you're being put in that position, how do you prove that, yes, I do have enough faith, right? You can't prove or quantify faith. It's abstract, okay? The third one, I'm only human. People sometimes say this, but some leaders, spiritually abusive leaders, will say this when they are being criticized or challenged. And it's a way to deflect responsibility. It's a way to avoid taking accountability for doing harm or for hurting someone. Okay. The fourth, we're all family here. Okay. And that can be used as a way to coerce and manipulate you into doing something you don't want to do. When someone does this, it's trying to create a false or rushed sense of intimacy and belonging that you may not be ready for. And again, even in healthy families, people have boundaries, people have ways of expressing and living out their own free will. Okay. Healthy families are individuals operating together. It's not just one big brain where everyone does what one person wants to do. Okay. And then the last one is be positive, be nice, speak life. And again, that's another way of kind of shielding people from noticing and speaking up about the truth. It's saying, you know what, there may be something here, but you can't speak up about it. Look the other way. We only want to hear nice and positive things. And the fact is, the truth is, sometimes the truth feels good to hear and sometimes it doesn't. And so again, these are the 5 phrases that I talked about. And just again, the disclaimer I talked about at the beginning, the phrases in and of themselves are not necessarily bad or harmful. If you hear them, it doesn't necessarily mean you're in a spiritually abusive environment. But what these phrases are used, they're used as weapons, and they're used as spiritual weapons to silence you, to try and control you, to get you to do what the spiritual authority or spiritual environment, and the abusive one wants you to do. It's a way to override your own free will, and that is harmful, and that is spiritual abuse. So if you found this information helpful, please give this video a thumbs up. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section. What other sorts of phrases do you feel like are common in spiritually abusive environments? If you would like a free consultation to help you understand how to recover from spiritual abuse, you can go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com, or click on the link in the description box in order to do that. All right. May you have a peaceful and wonderful day. Bye-bye.